More than anything, in looking at your work to start, what I would love to hear is a little bit about your personal story, your journey, inspiration. How did we get to, to Jules Wilson Design Studio 2021? How did we get here?
Sure. Well, I think as a child, I grew up in Rockford, Illinois, and so I wasn't surrounded by a lot of design. And I think that it really made me kind of go in my own fantasy world, if you will, as a child. I had a playroom with lots of Lego sets, very simple story that I would um, merge all together. My parents bought this home and it had a great swimming pool, but it didn't have a hot tub. And it was, a child's mind, it was confusing. Why don't we have a hot tub if we have a swimming pool? So I would go in my playroom and just mix my Legos together and lay all these fantasy houses, and every room had a hot tub in it. It's so ridiculous, but I think it got me on this mindset of what would be this fantasy ideal thing to have as you experience spaces. And so, long story short, it led me going to design school in the Design Institute of San Diego. After that, I studied in Florence, Italy. I
Mm.
had education in San Diego, but I really became obsessed with history. I wanted more culture. I also really enjoyed studying architecture. So I kind of traded with my parents to be able to study the things that I felt most passionate about. So I learned Italian, and I went and worked for an architect there and went to school, studied architectural history, studied industrial design. My parents were very wise because I was allowed to go on the basis that I would return, which was probably a good call by them, because I loved it there. But I think it really allowed me to find myself and find some of the things that are very true to my nature today, which is, modernism, but yet kind of rooted in history and acknowledging history. I think I get sad today sometimes when I feel this sense of loss of history, especially in San Diego, especially on the West Coast. We seem to kind of blow that off a little bit. So I love having that background.
It is, it's astonishing how many points of similarity there are. Um, you're probably not going to believe this, but before I co-founded Urban Bonfire in 2013, for about 7, almost 8 years, I was part of a real estate development and consulting group based out of Montreal that
Okay.
had clients all across North America and the Caribbean. And the firm's expertise was to activate and invigorate main streets, college downtowns,
Mhm.
downtowns of cities. One
Great.
of the projects that I worked on in an immersive way was the revitalization of downtown Rockford.
Really?
Yes, with the Rock River Development Corporation, and
Oh
at
my
time
gosh.
the mayor's name was Larry Morrissey, who was the
Okay.
mayor at the time.
Mhm.
He had come up to Montreal for an incredible charrette that we did on replanning and reestablishing cities. And I bring this up because Rockford is such an incredible example of real estate or city planning. And what happened over many years was, you may know that in the 50s and 60s, the University of Rockford was in downtown. It was in the core of the city, which activated the city. And
Mhm.
that was replaced some years later with, at the time, and I don't know if it's still the case, a prison. and the university was moved to the suburbs, which completely changed the scale and the dynamic sort of definition and meaning of the downtown core. So I'm not sure when the last time you were in Rockford was, but if you know, there's the Rockford City Market that happens every week in the downtown.
I'm not aware of that.
So that was one of the projects that we worked on, and working on the waterfront and music. And so very small world there.
That is. No,
the others, yeah, please.
No, I moved away from there in 91, and I haven't been there for 5 years, but there's always been a little piece of me that's kind of heartbroken about Rockford, because it does have this great waterfront, and you could kind of see the potential of what it could be or what it once was, and how much it was affected by changes that happened post-industrial era, et cetera. So
in speaking about architecture, I mean, downtown Rockford and the buildings along the waterfront they're majestic. They're so obviously with the tremendous legacy of Scandinavian and Swedish population.
Right. That's right.
Furniture and all of the industrial aspects of Rockford. And then looping that into your time in Florence and the architecture and these iconic buildings. And, I acknowledge looking at architecture with a gelato in your hand on the Ponte Vecchio is a very nice experience any way you slice it, of course. But yeah, I mean, you happen to have picked places, and Florence being one of my truly favorite cities in the world to be in. It's just incredible.
Oh, I love to hear that. Yeah, it has a special place in my heart.
It does.
It's a magical place, I think, especially at night when it quiets down and not all of the tourists are out. So living there in my early 20s, it's kind of a late lifestyle. You eat late, your social life is late. And I would love kind of walking home with my friends at night. It could be 2 a.m. or something, 1 a.m. But the streets were really quiet and really empty, and you could hear the fountains, and you could almost sort of be back in time and sort of imagine this intimate scale and the quietness. And I would love to hear the sound of my, cool Italian shoes walking on the pavement down the street. And yeah, it's a magical place.
It is. Out of curiosity, have your travels brought you to Montreal at any point?
I have been to Montreal. I love Montreal. I was only there for a weekend, so I don't know it super, super well. And it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. But really, really wonderful kind of European inspired type atmosphere. But also kind of a sense of just new and raw and alternative, and just kind of this energy for new things at the same time.
It is one of the great examples, and there are countless cities that do this well. New York does this extremely well. Places around, Tel Aviv and Jaffa in Israel, for example, with historic, iconic buildings and fusing in modern into it. Montreal is really a very strong fusion of the historic and the old. And then with fusion of creativity and new, living in a very, in certain cases, beautifully and seamless. In other cases, in my humble opinion, poorly planned and downright ostentatious. But nothing is perfect. It leads me into an interesting point. I know that you've done, or you do a significant amount of work, obviously in greater San Diego, where you're based, but working in Hawaii, for example. I know you've worked on a significant project in Nashville as well. How do you incorporate local story, architecture, nuance into your projects that reflect obviously your design principles and what you are trying to articulate as the lead designer in a project, while still being cognizant, sensitive to, or wanting to reflect local culture, norms, look, feel. How do you do that in such diverse areas at the same time?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I have kind of a funny story. When
Please.
we started working on our project, uh, Fifth and Broadway in Nashville, they flew me out to look at other, comp projects, comparable projects. And at the time, this is 6 years ago or so. And at the time, Nashville's been very up and coming. And we're seeing the fruits of that now. And 6 years ago, we could start to see it. But in the world of apartments and multifamily, there really wasn't much there to be inspired by. So they had planned this day of going here and going to this apartment building. And I think we went to one and a half. And I said, okay, nothing here is going to inspire me. We do plenty of multifamily housing. We're going to bring something unique, bigger, better, and different. Not that bigger is better. Just we're going to come in strong here. And so I really just, spent my time walking the streets, sitting in cafes, eating the food, watching the people, having a drink at night, not till 2 in the morning anymore. But really just trying to watch people and watch how they dress, watch how they act, watch how they behave, and then just imagine what would really, really excite. If I were that person living here and I went home, what would excite me? What would make me proud of where I am? One example, I think, where we did that very successfully was in the residences in Buckhead, Atlanta. And if you've been to Buckhead, Atlanta,
I have.
oh, wonderful. Then you may hopefully have seen they have these old neighborhoods with these fantastic old mansions. And my being a sucker for history, really, when I was driving around doing my investigative work, my car was steering to these fancy neighborhoods that were really adjacent to the project we were working on. And so what was originally planned for the project was, two towers with this, quote unquote community building in between. And I thought, oh gosh, am I really designing a community building? Do I want to kill myself right now? That sounds horrible. So, I'm laying in my hotel bed at night thinking, well, what do I want if I live here? What's going to excite me? Why do I want to live here? And so I said, I want a mansion. I want one of those mansions that's in this, cool neighborhood next door. So we presented it to the developer and the architects, and our community building became a mansion. And the landscape design became a lawn, like a mansion. And then we just had fun with it from there. The social area was a salon, there was a billiard room, the ballroom was the fitness area. It was almost like playing a game of Clue. But it sort of had all the components of what this...
Colonel Mustard in the library with the candlestick sort of thing.
Almost. I was ready to go there, but we kept that one on the DL.
I am a huge fan of Southern architecture. Back in my real estate days, I also lived in Beaufort, South Carolina for about a year and a half, and very similar scale of these incredibly majestic homes and beautiful trees and views. And it's a magical place. But in speaking this idea of space and mansion, and obviously working in places like San Diego and scaling out of downtown into larger
Mhm.
footprints of land and home,
Mhm.
I want to talk to you about, your experience in Florence, as example, European,
Okay.
Montreal too.
Mhm.
Very walkable, very dense, smaller,
Yes.
typically sizes of living space,
Lower.
lower,
Uh-huh.
but also more romantic and more fun because every little turn is something new to explore and experience. And in North America, we have, in many ways traded that for larger lots, for bigger homes, for needing to drive in most cases to whatever we
Mhm.
want. How do you balance those two kinds of two sides of the barbell, if you will?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think one of the big misses in kind of current urban environments and planning is intimacy. I think the reason that we love, you know, Firenze, the reason that we love Montreal, the reason that we love um, some of these great old cities is because of that intimate scale.
Mhm.
And so how do we do that now? I don't know. I think with all the regulations and I often tell my design team, stop making the hallways so wide, stop making these big corridors, stop making, break it down, break it down, break it down. But let it be bold and let it be beautiful. Um, I don't know that I'm answering your question, but I think on a side note, I've been very focused on this concept of really being embedded in nature and
Mm.
connected to nature. And so I recently bought a mid-century home that's historic, has a really fantastic history, and it was designed by an apprentice of Frank Lloyd Wright. It was his house. He built it with four craftsmen, but it's really connected to nature in the way that Frank, um, would do adjacent outdoor spaces connected to nature. So if you're not in that wonderful urban walkable environment, which I much preferred, and have now transitioned into a single family residence, um, I would say connecting with nature is a nice offset to the walkability. Now I'm still, 10 minutes or, I'm still 5 minutes in my car from a walkable area.
Amazing.
But to me, the trade is that connection to nature if you can't have
It's it
walkability.
is the absolute perfect segue into wanting to talk to you about your philosophy around outdoor space. So it couldn't be more on point and better timing. Um, Having looked at your work, it is glaringly obvious how important outdoor space is to you, both in terms of design and in terms of relevance and importance to your
Mhm.
client or clients. Forgive me. Um, I'd love to hear from you over the last 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, in some reasonable period of time. Have you seen or are you seeing a change of importance, definition, investment in prioritization of outdoor spaces from your clients? Is it changing where you don't necessarily have to push people as much to make it a priority, and it's not a phase 2 or a phase 3, it's a primary, it's a room, it's not a space?
Mhm.
Help me
Yeah.
understand that in your practice and what's being asked for by your clients.
Well, I think it's a question somewhat relative to geography because
Sure.
being in San Diego, I think the common denominator among San Diegans is that arguably we have the best weather in the country. It's
Maybe
really
even in
kind
the
of
world. I mean, it's
possibly.
literally perfection. It's incredible.
It's incredible. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, not that I could take credit, but it's what we all like, and it's a lot why we're all here, and it's all in our DNA. So we absolutely share that in common. So I think that the more that people use outdoor space, the more that they feel connected to it. I don't know. Let me retract what I'm saying. I think that we've always liked outdoor space as kind of a primal inclination, from way back when. I don't know if it's the vitamin D or the sun or the sounds or the smells. I mean, it's a feast for the senses, and I think there's something in there for everyone if you connect to it in the right way. I mean, I hate bugs. There's certain things about nature I can't handle. I'm not a camper. I'm sorry, everyone, but I'm not. Um,
Me neither.
but I love but I love the outdoors, and
But
I'm
you
very
mentioned
excited.
earlier, and it may be a bit of a segue or a bit of a weird example, but you mentioned your love of Lego and the ability to just open all the different boxes. And
Yeah,
again, on that point, because that was literally the only thing I played with. The box had the spaceships that you could build with the instructions.
right.
I never once did that. I dumped all of my Lego,
Yeah.
everything, every color, every size into a big bin, and I would just create.
Yes.
Um, and I think that subliminally for kids, the outdoors is that. The
Mhm.
indoors is confined in terms of weather, temperature, light, what you can, what you can't do. The outdoors is far more open end and far more, it promotes a greater sense of creativity and exploration because there is no terminating wall or ceiling or floor. It's
Right.
vast. And maybe that playfulness that you're
Mhm.
describing is in the same way as, you know, Legos are blocks, but what you can do with them is limitless.
Mhm.
Maybe subliminally, the outdoors is very much the same thing for people, and that's where it comes from.
I think you nailed it. I think this sense of limitless. Um, yeah, I think it's great. This house that we bought has, sliding doors and really deep eaves. And so when you open it up, you can really feel as if you're outdoors when you're in the indoors. It also has kind of a courtyard pocket that feels intimate. So the more that you can blur the indoors to feel like outdoors and the outdoors to feel like indoors, I would say just has this effect of calm, of peace, of tranquility. Um, with the business that I'm running today and the development projects that I'm doing with my boyfriend on the side, it's a lot to handle. And
Mhm.
so as much as I loved the vibrancy of, living in Little Italy and downtown, being able to come home to this reprieve and this connection to nature really feels like a gift. It really feels like a type of luxury in today's world where land is so precious, and it's sometimes hard to connect to it.
Very much so. And I have to imagine, or my hypothesis is, and this is not a loaded question, I believe this to be true, that over the last, again, let's use 10 years, for example, the improvement or the advent in technology as it relates to glass, nano walls, outdoor
Yeah.
materials for furniture, lighting, heat, shade, kitchens, appliances, surfaces. I mean, we're at a completely different level of scale and technology than we would have been if we were having this conversation a decade ago. So I imagine that makes it easier for someone in your role to activate outdoor space where you don't have to compromise on aesthetic and you can have cohesion without the risk or worry of the materials not handling or being able to stand up to the elements.
Right. Oh, you're 100% correct. The the fabrics that we have today, the fibers that we have today, all of that technology and furniture and design, you know, as you perfectly well know, with our outdoor kitchens and the opportunities that we have there. Now it's not just one kitchen in your home, it's, you know, your outdoor kitchen also. So it's really replicating everything that we do on the interiors to the exterior. You know, I love a lot of mid-century design, and it's very simple to see when you study mid-century design how back then, when they didn't have those things, you know, you look at the furniture they were using on the outside, and although it might look cool, it wasn't comfortable. It wasn't giving you necessary, in many cases, not all cases, but it wasn't giving you really that same type of experience that you can have on the interior in terms of comfort and relaxation. However, you could also argue in history that furniture was not necessarily designed to be comfortable the way that it is today. So I think this more willingness for pleasure seeking, more willingness to pamper ourselves is something that is accessible to many these days, as opposed to just the elite in history. So you can.
And I think that pampering or that luxurious experience in many ways can be more easily and in most cases more cost effectively accomplished outdoors versus indoors. So if you think about I was talking yesterday with someone about a quote unquote a spa room and the cost of building that indoors versus outdoors with a pergola and a hammock. And, you know, the end result for the user can be very similar, but a very different level of cost and use of space.
Yeah. I think that that's mostly true. However, I would say that we built a house a few years back on Sunset Beach in the North Shore of Hawaii. And the cost to build the lanais actually was the same cost for the architecture of the home.
Wow.
So, you know, sometimes outdoor things can be expensive.
For sure.
But at the same time, sometimes less is more on the outside. You can do a simple hammock and create a completely relaxing experience, and you don't need the art on the wall and the tables and the lamps and the rugs and all the other stuff. It can be, you know, a simple gesture.
Very true. And I like to say that what I realized, I was having a conversation many months ago with, you may know Doug Burge, architect up in northern, not northern, actually, just north of LA. It does some incredible work. And I was chatting with him, and I realized in that moment that when you think about the design or building of a home, there are certain fundamentals. You need a kitchen, a dining room, a living room, X number of bedrooms. There are certain fundamentals that are there. The outdoors is really more of an executive summary of the people's lives. They can have pools and flat screens. They can have yoga spaces. They can have gardening. They could have none. They could have a massive kitchen. They could have no kitchen. It's much more flexible and creative to handpick the experiences that you want and more easily weave them together because there are no preconceived notions or definitions of outdoor space.
Perfectly said. I will support what you say by giving you, we're working on doing our yard right now. And the program in our yard, I've set up I've had this childhood, I miss having grass. I miss having a lawn. I haven't had a lawn, you know, since I live with my parents. You know, I've been in these urban environments and what have you. So I'm like, I have a house. I want to have a lawn. I want to smell fresh cut grass. So I've set up a croquet court.
Nice.
I've set up an archery set. Um, I've set up not to kill any animals, but just for,
In case Gina Davis is in the neighborhood and wants to come over.
a fruit orchard.
Beautiful.
Unfortunately, I suck at gardening, but I did set up a hydroponic indoor garden in my
Nice.
recent remodeled kitchen. We are doing a sunken sectional, I'm sorry, a, sunken conversation pit with
Mm,
fire in the middle that can
conversation pit.
accommodate, mhm, 40 people, but it still feels intimate for 5 people. We really, I would say, got the scale right on this because it's so flexible, the quantity of people that can feel intimate and have conversation. And then we're setting up a hospitality bar with a charcuterie station
Obviously.
on the outdoor.
Well, when you're slicing, prosciutto and those types of things, it's very important to have that available. I mean, it's really a fundamental.
It is. So you're absolutely right. You get to when we were redoing our kitchen, my boyfriend and partner designs restaurants, really extravagant restaurants. And so I said, "What do you want in the kitchen?" And he said, "A charcuterie station." And I am thinking to myself, okay, this is not a commercial restaurant. Like we don't have stations necessarily. Um, so anyway, after much negotiation, we are going to have a charcuterie station, but it's going to be at the outdoor
And
kitchen
is it
area.
the old school with the wheel and it slices beautifully like you would see in a beautiful restaurant in Florence, obviously that first course being very that type of
Yes,
experience.
that
Wow.
really delicate,
Wonderful.
salty, meats. And so,
And if you can
um,
grow your own melons in your garden, you've really, you've complemented both sides of it. I mean, prosciutto
yeah,
melon is like, it's your classic there.
right. Well, and then
Wow.
I get basil from my hydroponic indoor garden in my kitchen.
Amazing. It sounds like a wonderful dream that is manifesting itself into reality for you. It sounds like so much fun.
Well, thank you. It is very much fun, so thank you. But to your point, the exterior spaces allow you to, I think, fulfill some of those greater fantasies, when I was living in a fantastic loft, I had a balcony, and
Mhm.
I had a couple cool pieces of furniture and some plants, and that was about all I could have, So in that spirit, it's nice to have a house also. I mean, I'm still a sucker for urban environments, to be honest,
Sure.
when in Rome, and if that's what you have, it's a real opportunity to, I think, let your hair down and really find your inner kid, your inner whatever that inner fantasy is that's gonna your mansion, your whatever.
It's much easier, I think, if you're looking at the polarity or the duality of urban versus and rural is not the right word to use here because it's 5 minutes, but let's say something more removed in terms of
Mhm.
size and scale. It's much easier to, I think, benefit from and enjoy being in that utopic nature environment that
Mhm.
you've described. And when you need that urban buzz, you know, dinner, a walk, an overnight in a hotel, those types of
Right,
things, the urban can be accomplished far more easily than living in urban and
right.
seeking out the space. That's harder to do, I believe.
What a good point. I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're right. We just came back from holiday in Tulum,
Mm.
and I came home, back to my own little. This is my little fern fantasy in the background here. I've been really into this fern fantasy concept. But I came home, and I think that connection to nature and being in the outdoor areas made me feel like, I'm kind of still on vacation at home. And I don't know that the urban environment gives you that kind of experience, but it does do many other things that are.
It does. And there's a worldwide movement towards urbanity, and people are moving from larger to be in contact with farmers markets and walking groups and yoga and restaurants, and are using patios, common areas, rooftops, courtyards, and saying, this is enough. I'm going to trade for that, particularly in the baby boomer and older generation. I mean, worldwide, the movement is unbelievable. But I feel very similarly to you in terms of sort of values, and that if it was picking one, I would absolutely pick space and outdoors, and not being confined by this is all that I can use in perpetuity, that I have the ability to add and, sort of grow creatively. I like having that sort of boundless future.
Yeah. Great.
Really fun. Jules, I have so enjoyed our conversation. I think that so many of our experiences are similar. Whether it would be so great to see your office, and when travel permits, I'd love to meet up with you. California is probably the first place I'm going to travel to when I'm allowed to actually get on a plane. And if for any reason your travels bring you to Montreal, it would be my greatest honor to give you a really nice walking tour of old Montreal and just really show you some of the special things you don't get on the sort of on the tourist maps. I would be honored to do that.
Oh, thank you. No, I'd love talking to you. I'd love to hear more about Rockford, actually. I mean, what a coincidence. And
unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's just, what a coincidence.
Yeah. My father would tell me growing up that when they put in the I-90 highway, that and it went kind of around Rockford, that it didn't bring people into Rockford, and it more took people out of Rockford. I don't know if there's anything to that, but that was one theory that I kind of would hear as a childhood, or I'm sorry, as a child.
Well, I don't have any of the current stats. And, when I was there, we're talking about 2000, and let me just think for a second, probably about 10 years ago, plus or minus. So arguably a lot of things change in that period of time. But I do remember the downtown to have tremendous vacancy at the commercial level. And there were a few very inspirational entrepreneurs who were making investments to reinvigorate the downtown. But as you know, Rockford faced tremendous challenges with crime and things like that. And one of the major reasons was that the downtown was basically desolate for the vast majority of hours. And there's been a real movement towards changing that. And I haven't been there in about 10 years, but it is my hope that, like many US cities and neighborhoods, focusing on reactivating the downtowns versus going further out into the suburbs.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, I would be so honored to have you. If you are in San Diego, I would love to have you to my office and
thank you.
Invite you to my home for a glass of wine, if that sounds good. And
I would love that. And I would love to meet your boyfriend and get a nice plate of prosciutto when I arrive. That would be absolutely wonderful. I would love nothing more.
Oh, great. Well, let's make it happen.
Look forward to it. I wish you all the best. Thanks for investing your time. I sincerely appreciate it. Continued success. I will continue to follow your amazing work, and hopefully we get to collaborate at some point in the future.
Yes, I would love that very much. Thank you.
Nice to speak to you. Be well.
You too.
Bye.